was one of those nights when the wind cut through everything, leaving a bitter chill that seemed to seep straight into the bones. She had just finished tidying up her small living room and was about to make herself a cup of tea when she heard a knock at the door. The sound was soft but firm, echoing strangely in the quiet night. At first she hesitated. Living alone meant she rarely had visitors, and the darkness outside always carried a sense of caution. Still, something made her move towards the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw a young man, bundled in a worn leather jacket that did little to protect him from the biting cold. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his head bowed slightly, and his shoulders shivering despite the jacket. There was a kind of vulnerability in him that she couldn't ignore. He didn't seem threatening, just cold and desperate. She opened the door a crack, her breath forming small clouds in the icy air. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, trying not to sound too harsh. The young man looked up, startled at first, then gave a small, hesitant nod. I just need somewhere to stay for the night," he muttered. His voice was low and cautious, as if he wasn't used to asking for help. She paused for a moment, her mind racing. She had heard stories about the Hells Angels. Their name carried fear and respect in equal measure. But she also knew that fear could not be the only guide in life. Something about him made her trust that this was not a man looking for trouble, but simply someone trying to survive the cold night. "Come in," she said finally, opening the door wider. He stepped in quickly and she closed the door behind him, shutting out the wind. The warmth from her small heater hit him immediately, and she could see the tension in his body start to ease just a little. "Thank you," he whispered, his teeth chattering as he removed his jacket. She noticed that his clothes were thin and worn, clearly not enough for the freezing temperatures outside. His boots were soaked, leaving small puddles on her floor, and she quickly grabbed a towel to help him dry off. "You're freezing," she said softly, guiding him to the living room. "Sit here. I'll get you some dry socks and a blanket." He hesitated for a moment, then followed her instructions. She handed him a warm blanket and a pair of socks she had tucked away in a drawer. He pulled them on with grateful hands, glancing around the room as if unsure where to place his trust. She didn't press him for answers, just offered a seat near the small heater. While he settled, she went into the kitchen to make some tea and a simple snack. She could hear him shifting in the blanket, the sound of relief mingling with exhaustion. When she returned, she handed him a steaming cup of tea and a plate of sandwiches she had quickly prepared. "Here," she said gently. "Eat something. You need your strength." He looked at her, his eyes softening for the first time. "Thank you." "Really?" he said quietly. "I wasn't sure anyone would." "I didn't know if anyone would help." She smiled faintly, trying to ease his discomfort. "Everyone deserves a warm place to sleep, especially on a night like this. Sit down, relax. No one's going to hurt you here." He nodded again, slowly sipping the tea. As the warmth spread through him, he began to talk, hesitantly at first. He told her that he had been out with friends and the cold had caught them off guard. Their car had broken down a few streets away, and they had nowhere to go. He didn't mention the gang directly, but she could tell by the subtle tattoos and the leather jacket that he was connected. Still, he didn't seem dangerous. He seemed more like a young man caught in a difficult situation. She listened patiently, asking questions when appropriate but mostly letting him speak. The night stretched on quietly, the wind howling outside while the heater hummed in the background. She noticed the way he shivered occasionally, and without thinking she offered him her own sweater. He looked at her in surprise, hesitating but accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." As they talked, she learned more about him. He was younger than she had guessed, barely out of his teens. There was a softness to him that his rough exterior couldn't hide. He spoke about his family with a mixture of pride and worry, and she could sense that he carried burdens far beyond what someone his age should bear. He didn't ask for anything, only accepted her kindness with humility. The night grew later and the cold outside became almost unbearable. She prepared a small space for him to sleep, clearing a corner of the living room with blankets and pillows. "You'll be warmer here than outside," she said softly. He lay down, still wary but trusting enough to stay. Before she went to bed herself, she knelt beside him. "If you need anything in the middle of the night, just call me. I won't ignore you." He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. I appreciate this more than I can say," he whispered. She smiled, a quiet warmth filling her chest. "Just rest, that's all I ask." She went to her room, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind wandered between concern and curiosity. She thought about the risks she had taken, letting a stranger in, especially one who could be part of a notorious group. But she also knew that sometimes life required small acts of bravery, small acts of kindness. She reminded herself that fear alone shouldn't guide her decisions. Meanwhile, the young man lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't used to people being this kind to him, and he found himself thinking about the strange, generous woman who had taken him in. He had expected suspicion, maybe even anger, but what he had found was comfort, safety, and warmth. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone truly saw him, not as a gang member or a troublemaker, but as a human being in need. Morning light eventually seeped through the blinds, softening the edges of the night's harshness. He stirred, still wrapped in the blanket, and looked around the room. She was already up, moving quietly, making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the small apartment, a simple but comforting reminder of normalcy. "Morning," she said gently, not looking at him directly, giving him space to wake fully. "Morning," he replied, still a little dazed. He ate quietly, his movements slow but deliberate. She didn't press him to talk, letting him ease into the new day. There was a strange tension in the room, a mix of relief and the unspoken awareness that their encounter was unusual, almost surreal. Before leaving, he pulled on his jacket, which now smelled faintly of the warmth he had felt in her home. "I don't know how to thank you," he said again, his voice low but sincere. I don't think anyone else would have done this." She shrugged lightly, smiling. "You don't need to thank me. Just stay safe, okay?" He nodded, hesitated, then added, I might bring my family by. They're struggling too, just for a night if that's okay." She paused for a moment, considering. There was fear, yes, but also empathy. "If they need a place to stay, I'll help," she said finally. "Just make sure they know the rules here. Respect the space and everyone will be fine." He smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I promise no trouble, just warmth for a night." He left quietly, the sound of his boots fading into the cold morning. She watched him go, feeling a mixture of worry and hope. Something told her that this small act of kindness might ripple further than she imagined. As she returned to her breakfast, she couldn't help but smile softly. It wasn't just about helping someone that night. It was about choosing to see the humanity in another person, even when fear told her otherwise. She felt a quiet strength in herself, a reminder that compassion could be simple, but powerful. And somewhere down the street, the young man walked with a little more hope than he had felt in a long time, carrying with him the memory of a stranger's warmth on a cold, lonely night. The next few days passed in a strange mix of normal routine and lingering thoughts about the young man who had knocked on her door. She kept herself busy doing chores, running errands, and catching up on work, but her mind kept returning to that night. She wondered how he was doing, whether he and his family were managing through the cold. There was a nagging curiosity, but also a small thread of worry. She had opened her home to a stranger, and even though he seemed honest, the reality of the world was that people weren't always what they seemed. She went about her days carefully, noticing little things she hadn't before. The quiet hum of her heater, the way sunlight filtered through her window, the subtle sounds of her neighborhood. Every now and then she would glance at the door, half expecting another knock. She didn't know exactly what she hoped for, but a part of her wanted to see him again, to know that he was safe. Meanwhile, the young man walked through the streets with a mixture of relief and apprehension. That night had given him more than warmth. It had given him a sense that someone cared. He found himself thinking about the woman's eyes, the calm way she had spoken, the simple way she had offered comfort without judgment. It wasn't like anything he had experienced before. His life had been a constant balancing act between fear and loyalty, between proving himself to people who barely trusted him and surviving in a world that seemed cold and unforgiving. But that night he had felt something different. He returned to the place where his family had been staying, a small rundown motel on the edge of town. His siblings and parents were grateful to see him, carrying their own exhaustion and frostbite from being caught in the harsh winter. He recounted the night with care, describing the warmth, the tea, the blanket, and the kindness of the woman who had taken him in. Their eyes widened, a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You really trust her?" his younger brother asked, a hint of worry in his voice. I don't know about trust, he admitted, but she's different. She didn't judge me. She didn't ask questions. She just helped. I've never felt anything like that. His family was hesitant at first, but the idea of warmth, food, and safety was too tempting to resist. The mother looked at him, worry etched into her face. "Do you really think it's safe?" she asked. He nodded firmly. "I think she's the real deal. I don't know why, but I feel like we can trust her, at least for a night." And so a plan began to form. They wouldn't stay long, just enough to escape the cold. But even in that small decision, there was a sense of hope and possibility. The thought of entering a stranger's home was daunting, yet it also promised comfort and safety, things they hadn't experienced for a long time. Back at her apartment, she went about her day with a quiet anticipation she didn't fully understand. She reminded herself not to expect anything, not to let her imagination run wild. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that her small act of kindness might come back to her in ways she hadn't yet imagined. That evening, as she was tidying the living room, she heard the faint roar of a motorcycle outside. She froze for a moment, unsure if it was connected or just a coincidence. She walked to the window cautiously, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. At first, she saw only a single bike parked at the curb. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be him? She watched as a figure stepped off the motorcycle, bundled against the cold, moving toward her door. She opened it cautiously, and there he was, standing with a shy, hesitant smile. "Evening," he said, his voice low but steady. "I hope I'm not intruding too much." "Not at all," she replied, trying to keep her tone calm despite the flutter of nervous excitement in her chest. "Come in, you're welcome." He stepped inside, shaking off the cold, and removed his jacket. The smell of leather mixed with the faint odor of motor oil filled the room. She handed him a towel to dry off, just as she had before. "I wanted to bring my family," he said quietly. "Just for a night. They've been struggling with the cold. I thought maybe you could help again." Her heart skipped. She had anticipated maybe one or two extra people, but she hadn't expected a whole family. Still, the warmth she had felt the previous night encouraged her to say yes. "If they need a safe place, I'll help. Just make sure everyone understands the rules here. No fighting, no trouble, and respect the space." He nodded, relief washing over his face. "I promise, no trouble. Just warmth for a night." Within the hour, more figures appeared outside, cautiously approaching her apartment. She opened the door to see not just the young man, but several others. A mix of men, women, and teenagers, all bundled against the cold. She counted at least 6 or 7 of them at first, their faces tired but grateful. "Please," the young man said, stepping forward. "Just for one night. That's all we ask." She took a deep breath, scanning their faces. There was fear, yes, but also humility. They weren't demanding or threatening. They were simply human beings caught in a situation beyond their control. She nodded. "Okay, one night. But you must promise me. You take care of each other and respect my home. Do I have your word?" They nodded in unison, and she felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The apartment quickly filled with the sound of jackets being removed, blankets being unfolded, and murmurs of gratitude. She offered them tea and simple snacks, watching as they slowly relaxed into the warmth. Throughout the night, conversations began to flow. She listened as they shared stories of their lives, the challenges they faced, and the small victories they had managed to cling to. She realized that beneath the rough exterior and the intimidating tattoos, these were people with fears, dreams, and families, just like anyone else. One of the women, probably in her late 30s, spoke softly about her children and how difficult it had been to keep them safe during the harsh winter. A teenage boy shyly mentioned how he had missed school, but had been helping his family survive. Each story added layers of humanity to the group, erasing some of the stereotypes that she had unconsciously carried. She found herself laughing quietly with them over small things. Spilled tea, a clumsy attempt at balancing a plate of sandwiches, the way the youngest child clung to a blanket like it was a shield against the world. For a moment, the cold, harsh world outside seemed to fade, replaced by warmth, conversation, and the faint sense of community that had been missing in her life. As the night deepened, she noticed the young man watching her from across the room. His eyes carried a mixture of gratitude and quiet wonder. She realized that her small gesture had rippled farther than she had imagined. It wasn't just about giving someone warmth for a night. It was about showing them that kindness still existed, that even in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving, people could care. She offered them all blankets and pillows on the floor and couches, making sure everyone had a comfortable spot. She moved carefully among them, making sure the youngest children were warm, that the adults had hot drinks, and that the atmosphere remained calm. The apartment was small, and it felt crowded, but there was a strange sense of peace in the organized chaos. As she prepared to head to her own room, she thought about the choices that had led her here. She could have ignored the knock, locked the door, and pretended nothing had happened. But she hadn't. She had chosen compassion, and in doing so, she had invited a small but significant change into her life. Late into the night, the sounds of quiet conversation, occasional laughter, and soft sighs of relief filled the apartment. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside there was warmth, safety, and the quiet magic of human connection. She found herself smiling softly, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. Before she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the young man and his family, hoping that this night would give them a small measure of hope in their difficult lives. She felt a quiet anticipation, knowing that the night was far from over, that the story of this small act of kindness was only beginning. Somewhere in the corner of the apartment, the young man watched her as well, silently promising himself that he would repay this kindness in some way, though he didn't yet know how. For now, he simply allowed himself to rest, wrapped in warmth, safety, and the hope that there were still good people in the world. The morning after the family arrived, her small apartment was filled with a quiet, tense energy. She moved through the space carefully, making tea for everyone while the smell of toast filled the room. The family was still tired from the night before, and the children clung to their blankets like security blankets, eyes wide as they peeked at her. She noticed the subtle fear in their movements, the way they hesitated to touch things, the way they whispered to each other. It reminded her that even though warmth had been provided, trust was not instant. The young man who had first knocked on her door hovered near the kitchen, awkward and respectful. He watched as she handed a cup of tea to the mother, who took it with a small nod of gratitude, her eyes scanning the apartment as if measuring the space for safety. He was quiet, but attentive, making sure the children had breakfast, that the blankets were properly arranged, and that everyone felt included. Even with all their rough edges, there was a subtle grace in the way he managed the family's little needs. She noticed the care in his movements and felt a small surge of admiration. It was one thing to accept help, but it was another to ensure that others were looked after first. She realized that the kindness he had received the night before had passed through him and now extended to his family. While breakfast was simple, toast, eggs, and warm tea, it carried more weight than just food. The children smiled shyly as she handed them small portions, their eyes lighting up in ways she hadn't seen in a long time. One of the younger girls, no more than 10, accidentally spilled a little tea on the floor. Before she could react with irritation, the young man gently guided her hand and helped her clean it up, smiling in a reassuring way. "It's okay," he whispered softly. "Accidents happen." The atmosphere slowly began to shift. The initial fear that had hovered over the apartment started to soften, replaced with cautious relief. The family began to move more freely, the children laughing quietly as they explored the small living space. The mother offered a grateful nod, and even the father, a quiet man with sharp eyes, seemed to relax slightly. It was a small victory, but to her, it felt monumental. She realized that trust could be built one careful step at a time. After breakfast, she offered them a brief tour of the apartment, showing them where they could leave their coats, where to use the bathroom, and how to handle small things like the heater or the kitchen appliances. The father nodded quietly, absorbing every detail, and she felt a strange sense of connection forming. It wasn't just about survival or shelter, it was about understanding and respecting one another. The day moved on slowly, filled with quiet routines. She helped the children with simple tasks, folding laundry, brushing off snow from their jackets, and finding warm socks. She even showed them how to make simple snacks, laughing when the younger ones fumbled with the bread or spread too much jam. Their laughter was genuine, innocent, and it reminded her of the small joys she often overlooked in her own life. The young man stayed close, observing her actions, offering small comments or assistance without being intrusive. At one point, he asked if he could help with some chores, and she smiled, handing him a broom. He worked quietly, moving with care and efficiency, demonstrating a surprising attentiveness that made her feel even more at ease. She realized that the kindness she had offered the night before had not only given him warmth, but had also inspired him to pass it along to his family. As the afternoon approached, she noticed the subtle ways the family began to interact with her. The mother brought her a cup of tea with a shy smile, muttering a quiet, "Thank you." The father, who had been silent most of the morning, finally spoke, complimenting the apartment's cleanliness and the way she had organized everything. It was small talk, but it carried a weight of appreciation and respect. During a quiet moment, the young man and she sat in the living room, sipping tea together. He seemed nervous but determined to speak. I don't know how to explain this," he began, glancing toward his family. "But what you did for me, it's not just warmth. It's more than that, it's hope." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Sometimes small gestures can change a lot," she said softly. "Even if it's just one night, it can mean the world to someone." He looked at her with an intensity that surprised her. "I've been through a lot," he admitted quietly, "and no one has ever treated me like that. Not really. Not without expecting something in return." "That's because kindness doesn't always come with a catch," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You give it, and sometimes it comes back in ways you don't expect. But even if it doesn't, it's still worth giving." He nodded, absorbing her words. There was a thoughtful silence between them, filled only by the faint hum of the heater and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. She realized that in this moment she was seeing him as he truly was, a young man capable of care and responsibility, despite the circumstances of his life. The family spent the rest of the day quietly settling in, getting used to the small space and the warmth it offered. The children played quietly in a corner, sharing small toys they had brought with them. The adults talked in hushed tones, planning how they would manage the next day, but always mindful of the rules she had set. There was a sense of order emerging from the chaos, and it made her feel more confident that her decision to help them had been the right one. As evening approached, the temperature outside dropped even further, and the wind howled like a living thing. She prepared a simple dinner, pasta with a light sauce and bread, enough to fill their stomachs without being extravagant. The family gathered around the table, and she served them with quiet care. There were smiles, shy but genuine, and a sense of camaraderie began to grow. After dinner, the children were tucked into blankets, and the adults sat quietly in the living room, sipping tea and talking softly. The young man approached her again, carrying a small notebook he had brought with him. "I wanted to write something," he said, a little embarrassed. "Just to say thanks. I don't know if it makes sense, but I wanted to try." She took the notebook, reading the few lines he had written. It was simple, heartfelt, and honest. He expressed gratitude for the warmth, the kindness, and the safe space she had provided. It was not just words. It was an acknowledgement of her humanity and the impact her actions had on theirs. She felt a lump in her throat, touched by the sincerity. As the night deepened, she moved through the apartment, making sure everyone was comfortable. The father had claimed a small couch, the mother was settled in a corner with the children, and the young man had his blanket near the heater. She paused, for a moment watching them sleep or rest, and felt a profound sense of connection. This wasn't just about providing shelter. It was about creating a space where people could feel seen, safe, and human. Before heading to her own room, she stopped by the young man's side. "If you need anything tonight, don't hesitate," she said softly. "We'll get through this cold together." He nodded, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done without you." She smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the heater's reach. It was the warmth of knowing that in a small way, she had made a difference, and that her choice to act with compassion had created ripples she could not yet see. As she settled into her own bed, She reflected on the day. The apartment was filled with people she had barely known a few days ago, yet now it felt alive in a way she hadn't experienced before. There was laughter, quiet conversation, and a sense of trust growing slowly but steadily. She realized that helping others wasn't always simple, but it was always worth it. Somewhere in the corner of the apartment, the young man watched her again, silently promising himself that he would not forget this night. He had seen a side of life he had never experienced, a side where people acted out of kindness without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson he would carry forward, not just for himself but for his family as well. The night stretched on, filled with quiet moments, soft murmurs, and the occasional chuckle from the children. Outside, the world remained cold and unforgiving, but inside, warmth, trust, and humanity had taken root. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she also knew that for now, they had found a fragile sanctuary in her small apartment, a place where compassion had created something extraordinary. And in the quiet of the night, both she and the young man understood that this was more than just a single act of kindness. It was the beginning of a bond that would shape the days to come, a bond built on trust, respect, and the simple power of seeing another person as human first. The morning began quietly, but a strange feeling hung in the air. She had grown accustomed to the young man and his family being around, to the small routines they had formed over the last few days. Yet there was a tension she couldn't shake, a whisper in the back of her mind that something unexpected might happen. Perhaps it was the fear that had never fully left, or maybe it was just the unease of having strangers in her small apartment. Either way, she went about her morning carefully, preparing breakfast while keeping an eye on the children who were now laughing and playing more freely. Outside, the wind continued to bite, but something else began to stir. The sound of a motorcycle echoed faintly in the distance. At first she thought it was one of the neighbors, but then she heard another, and another. Her heart skipped a beat as she peered out the window. At first, it was only a few bikes scattered down the street, but soon she realized there were more, dozens of them, roaring toward her building. Her pulse quickened. She had expected perhaps a couple of people from the family circle, but not this. She watched as the motorcycles slowed and stopped in front of her apartment building. Men in leather jackets, some with patches and insignias that made her stomach tighten, began to step down. The Hells Angels. She recognized the symbols from news stories and documentaries. The sight of them sent a jolt of fear through her chest. Morning came slowly, and with it a quiet calm that was different from the previous days. The apartment, once filled with the sounds of motorcycles, chatter, and movement, now felt peaceful. The wind outside still howled through the streets, but inside warmth lingered, not just from the heater, but from the presence of people who had shared something extraordinary the night before. She moved through the apartment carefully, tidying up small messes, collecting blankets, and making tea. Her movements were slower, reflective, as if she were savoring the quiet after the storm of activity. The young man and his family were stirring. The children had slept longer than usual, their exhaustion from the past days finally catching up. They yawned and stretched, still wrapped in the blankets she had offered, and their eyes carried a softness she had not seen before. The young man watched them closely, a protective and gentle presence, a reflection of the care he had received and now passed along. She prepared a simple breakfast, enough for everyone, while keeping an eye on the small, subtle ways the family moved around her apartment. There was gratitude in every glance, every careful step, every whispered thank you. She felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that this simple act of sharing food and space had left a mark. The bikers, now calm and organized, were gathering themselves for departure. Some had stayed longer than necessary, ensuring that the family would be safe, that they would leave with warmth and shelter. She watched them quietly, realizing that the men who often inspired fear in stories and media could also act with deep loyalty, respect, and humanity. They were a living paradox, strong and intimidating, yet capable of gentleness and gratitude. The young man approached her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and sincerity. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for me, but for my family. You've given us something we didn't expect, something we needed more than I realized." "You've already thanked me," she replied softly. By being honest, caring for your family, and trusting me. That's thanks enough. He shook his head, smiling faintly. It's more than that. You've reminded me that kindness still exists, that people can see beyond appearances. I won't forget this. The father of the family, a quiet man who had spoken little but observed much, approached her as well. Your home, he said simply, is more than shelter. It's safety. It's trust. We won't forget it. His words were sincere, measured, and carried the weight of someone who had learned to measure trust carefully over the years. As the morning progressed, the bikers began to leave, one by one. She watched as they mounted their motorcycles, their movements precise and deliberate. Some waved, some nodded, and a few gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a gesture of respect, a way of acknowledging her courage and compassion without words. The young man followed last, pausing to glance back at her apartment before mounting his bike. The family stood near the doorway, bundled up and ready to face the cold once more. The children clutched their blankets, their eyes bright with the memory of warmth, laughter, and safety. Thank you, the mother whispered, voice trembling slightly. For everything. You're welcome, she replied gently. Take care of each other, stay safe, and remember that kindness is never wasted. They left slowly, the sound of their footsteps and the motorcycles fading into the distance. She closed the door behind them, standing in the quiet apartment that now felt strangely empty. The warmth lingered, but it was the absence of people that made the silence feel heavy. For a moment she leaned against the door, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days. It had started with a single knock on a cold night, a young man, shivering, looking for warmth. From that one act of courage and kindness, an entire chain of events had unfolded, connecting strangers in ways she could never have predicted. The young man and his family had experienced safety, warmth, and a reminder of humanity. The bikers had witnessed a rare act of selflessness, one that they honored in their own way. And she, in turn, had discovered the profound impact of small, thoughtful actions. As she moved through the apartment, tidying and organizing, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Fear could be paralyzing, but courage and empathy often required little more than opening a door, offering warmth and believing in the goodness of others. She had faced the unknown and found that trust, even with strangers, could create unexpected bonds. She thought about the young man in particular. He had been cautious, wary, and hardened by life's challenges, yet her small gesture had unlocked something in him. A sense of hope, a reminder of what it meant to be seen and cared for. He had carried that kindness forward to his family and, ultimately, to the larger group of bikers who respected loyalty and honor above all else. It was a chain reaction of humanity, one she had never imagined she would witness firsthand. In the quiet that followed, she sat down by the window, watching the sunlight glint off the rooftops. The city moved on as always, unaware of the small but meaningful events that had unfolded within her apartment. Yet she felt different. She had seen courage in ordinary acts, strength in humility, and humanity in the most unlikely of places. The experience had changed her perspective, leaving her with a quiet confidence in the goodness of people. The young man's words echoed in her mind. You've reminded me that kindness still exists. She realized that it was true for her as well. In helping someone, she had been reminded of her own capacity for empathy and bravery. She had been part of a story that was larger than herself, a story that would linger in her memory and influence her actions long after the cold nights had passed. Later that day, she received a quiet visit from one of the bikers who had stayed behind to make sure everything was in order. He approached her respectfully, his demeanor calm but serious. I just wanted to say one more time, he said. Thank you. Not everyone would have done what you did. You've shown us all that even in a world full of hard edges, kindness matters. You don't need to thank me again, she replied, smiling softly. The act itself was enough. Seeing everyone safe and warm, that's thanks enough for me. He nodded, acknowledging her words, and left quietly. The apartment felt even emptier after his departure, but the sense of accomplishment and warmth lingered. She moved through the space slowly, touching the blankets, the mugs, the small traces of their presence, and felt a quiet gratitude for the opportunity to have been part of something so meaningful. In the days that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm, but the memories of that week remained vivid. The young man and his family had found temporary safety, and she hoped that the lessons of trust and kindness would guide them in the days to come. The bikers had left a mark as well, showing that even those with a rough exterior could honor compassion and loyalty. And she herself had been reminded that courage, empathy, and small gestures could create ripples far beyond what one might imagine. She reflected on the entire experience and realized that the story wasn't just about helping strangers, it was about understanding that everyone carries burdens, fears, and hopes. She had witnessed how a single act of generosity could bridge gaps, dissolve fear, and create connections between people who would otherwise remain strangers. The children's laughter, the family's quiet gratitude, the bikers' respectful nods, all of these moments formed a tapestry of humanity that she would carry with her forever. It was a reminder that in a world often dominated by fear, prejudice, and harshness, there were still moments of grace, understanding, and genuine care. She smiled softly, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. The apartment was now quiet, the wind outside still harsh, but the warmth of human connection remained. She realized that sometimes the most ordinary people, in ordinary spaces, could create extraordinary impacts through simple acts of kindness. Even as the days passed and the memory of the bikers and the family faded into the routines of life, the lessons remained. She had learned that courage could be quiet, that trust could be fragile yet powerful, and that compassion had the ability to transform lives, often in ways that were unseen at first. The young man's family had left her apartment not just warmed and fed, but reminded of the humanity that existed in even the harshest of worlds. The bikers had left with respect, gratitude, and a story they would carry with them, one that reaffirmed their belief in loyalty, honor, and kindness. And she herself had been transformed, reminded that in opening her door to a stranger, she had opened her heart to a world of possibilities. As she sat by the window, watching the sunlight glint across the rooftops, she realized that life often presented opportunities in unexpected ways. A single knock on a cold night had led to days filled with laughter, gratitude, respect, and reflection. It had reminded her that small gestures could have enormous impact and that sometimes humanity revealed itself most clearly in the simplest acts of kindness. And with that thought, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. The world outside remained unpredictable and harsh, but within her heart, a warmth lingered, a warmth born of courage, empathy, and the knowledge that even one person's actions could ripple far beyond what anyone could see. She knew that the story would stay with her forever, a reminder that kindness, trust, and humanity were worth more than fear.